The leather binding cracked like old bones as Sarah's trembling fingers opened the diary she'd found hidden beneath the floorboards. The first entry, dated 50 years ago, began with words that made her blood freeze. "The rituals must continue, or they will never leave this room." Sarah Chen had always been practical about moving. At 28, she'd relocated enough times to know the drill. Pack efficiently, label everything, and don't get emotional about leaving. But as she climbed the narrow staircase to apartment 3B, cardboard boxes cutting into her arms, something felt different about this place. The Whitmore building had been advertised as vintage charm at an unbeatable price, and now she understood why it was unbeatable. The wallpaper peeled like ancient skin, revealing patches of wall that seemed to breathe in the flickering light. Each step on the wooden stairs announced her arrival with a groan that echoed through the empty corridors. The landlord, Mr. Hartwell, had handed over the keys with unusual haste, muttering something about the previous tenant leaving rather suddenly. Sarah had dismissed his nervous energy as typical landlord eccentricity, but now, standing before the heavy oak door marked 3B, she felt the first whisper of unease crawl up her spine. The apartment was larger than expected, with high ceilings that disappeared into darkness and windows that faced a brick wall so close she could touch it. Sarah spent her first evening unpacking by the light of a single lamp, the overhead fixture having died with a spark and the smell of burning dust the moment she'd flicked the switch. The previous tenant had left behind some furniture, a heavy mahogany dresser, an ornate mirror with a crack running diagonally across its surface, and a bed frame that looked like it belonged in a Victorian funeral parlor. As she arranged her belongings, Sarah noticed irregularities in the hardwood floor, dark stains that looked suspiciously like old bloodstains, scratches that formed strange symbols, and one floorboard near the window that sat slightly higher than the rest. When she pressed down on it, it gave way with a soft click. Curiosity overrode caution as she pried at the loose board with a butter knife, revealing a hollow space beneath. Inside lay a leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed with age, and its cover worn smooth by countless hands. The diary's first entry was dated March 15, 1974, written in elegant cursive that spoke of a different era. "My name is Eleanor Blackwood, and I fear I have made a terrible mistake." The advertisement promised a quiet room for scholarly pursuits, but this place harbors something ancient and hungry. The rituals began 3 nights after I moved in. I thought they were dreams at first, shadows moving independently of their sources, whispers in languages I don't recognize, the feeling of being watched by eyes that exist in dimensions parallel to our own. Sarah's coffee grew cold as she read, drawn deeper into Eleanor's increasingly frantic accounts. The entries described strange occurrences, furniture moving on its own, temperature drops that left frost on the windows in summer, and most disturbing of all, the gradual realization that Eleanor was not the first tenant to experience these phenomena. The diary contained pressed flowers between its pages, nightshade, wolfsbane, and other plants Sarah recognized from her botany studies as ingredients in protection spells. Eleanor had been trying to shield herself from something, but from what? As Sarah delved deeper into the diary, Eleanor's entries became more detailed and more terrifying. She discovered that her room had been the site of occult rituals dating back to the building's construction in 1892. The original owner, Silas Whitmore, had been a practitioner of what Eleanor termed shadow magic, rituals designed to thin the veil between dimensions and allow entities from other realms to cross over. Eleanor's research had uncovered a pattern. Every tenant in room 3B had either disappeared mysteriously or died under suspicious circumstances. The rituals required a living conduit, someone whose life energy could power the summoning circles carved into the floorboards beneath years of paint and varnish. Eleanor had tried to break the cycle by performing counter-rituals using salt circles and protective herbs, but her entries grew increasingly desperate. They're getting stronger. I can feel them pressing against the barriers I've erected. The shadows have eyes now, and they watch me sleep. I've found references to a binding ritual that might send them back, but it requires a sacrifice, and I'm beginning to understand that I might be that sacrifice. Driven by a mixture of academic curiosity and growing dread, Sarah began her own investigation into the building's history. The public library's archives painted a disturbing picture. 17 tenants of room 3B had vanished without explanation over the past century, their belongings left behind as if they had simply evaporated. Newspaper clippings from different decades told similar stories. Young people, mostly women, who had moved into the apartment and were never seen again. The police reports were frustratingly vague, mentioning no signs of struggle and personal effects undisturbed. Sarah noticed a pattern in the disappearances. They occurred in cycles, roughly every 5 to 7 years, always in March. Eleanor Blackwood's name appeared in a 1974 missing person report, filed by a concerned colleague when she failed to show up for work at the university where she taught medieval history. The final entry in Eleanor's diary was dated March 31st, 1974, exactly 50 years ago. Sarah realized with growing horror that she had moved in on March 1st, and according to Eleanor's research, the supernatural activity in the room intensified during the final weeks of March, culminating in the spring equinox. Sarah's skeptical nature began to crumble as Eleanor's predicted phenomena manifested in her own experience. It started subtly. Items she was certain she'd placed in one location appearing somewhere else, the persistent feeling of being watched, and a coldness that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves rather than any external source. The antique mirror reflected movements that didn't correspond to her own, and she began to notice that her shadow sometimes lingered a moment too long when she moved away from light sources. The diary had warned of escalating activity, and Eleanor's timeline proved unnervingly accurate. On March 10th, exactly as Eleanor had documented, Sarah woke to find all her furniture rearranged in a perfect circle around the center of the room. On March 15th, she discovered symbols carved into her wooden dresser, the same symbols Eleanor had sketched in the diary's margins. The whispers began on March 20th, voices speaking in what sounded like Latin mixed with something older and more primal. Sarah tried to rationalize these experiences, blaming stress, suggestion, and her overactive imagination. But deep down, she knew she was experiencing exactly what Eleanor had 50 years earlier. Determined not to become another disappearance statistic, Sarah threw herself into Eleanor's research with desperate intensity. The diary's later entries contained detailed instructions for protective rituals and binding ceremonies, knowledge Eleanor had gathered from rare books and consultation with other practitioners. Sarah gathered the required materials: sea salt for protective circles, white sage for cleansing, black candles for grounding, and iron nails to seal doorways and windows. Following Eleanor's meticulous instructions, she arranged these items throughout the apartment, creating multiple layers of protection. The most crucial element was timing. The binding ritual had to be performed at the exact moment when the veil between dimensions was thinnest, which according to Eleanor's calculations was midnight on March 31st. Sarah practiced the incantations until she could recite them perfectly, her voice growing stronger with each repetition. She understood that she had one chance to break the cycle that had claimed so many lives. If she failed, she would join the long list of vanished tenants, and someone else would eventually find her diary hidden beneath the floorboards. continuing the cycle of horror indefinitely. Sarah's eyes snapped open to absolute darkness. The digital clock's green glow was gone. The streetlight that usually filtered through her window had vanished, and even the ambient city sounds had been swallowed by an oppressive silence. As her vision adjusted, she realized she wasn't alone. Tall figures stood around her bed, 7 of them, maybe 8, their forms so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than merely block it. They had no discernible features, yet she could feel their ancient eyes boring into her soul, studying her with the cold curiosity of scientists examining a specimen. The air grew thick and electric, charged with malevolent energy that made her skin crawl, and her heart pound against her ribs like a caged bird. Eleanor's diary lay open beside her, its pages fluttering despite the absence of any breeze, and Sarah realized with crystalline terror that she had become part of the ritual herself. The shadows began to move closer, their whispers rising to a crescendo of otherworldly voices. And in that moment of absolute horror, Sarah understood that some cycles are never meant to be broken, only continued by new participants who believe they can escape what so many others could not.